Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes what to know about the kaffiyeh, a symbol of the Palestinian cause. Gaza conflict, Middle East tourism struggles for survival. Israel considers how to remove threat of Hamas fighters in Gaza. Wartime unity between the US and Israel will soon face its toughest test. Blinken returns to Israel as negotiators race to prolong Gaza ceasefire. What to know about the kaffiyeh, a symbol of the Palestinian cause. Washington Post. The kaffiyeh, a traditional Arab headdress that has come to symbolize solidarity with the Palestinian cause, is experiencing a resurgence of popularity. The black and white checkered scarf has been associated with Palestinians for decades and has become increasingly prominent since the start of the Israel-Gaza war. The kaffiyeh originated as a practical garment worn by farmers and rural peasants to protect against the sun, sand, and sweat. It became more widely worn during the Arab Revolt against the British Mandate for Palestine in the 1930s and gained even greater prominence in the second half of the 20th century. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat began wearing the kaffiyeh in the 1960s, and during the First Intifada in the 1980s, Palestinian men wore it to disguise themselves while throwing stones at Israeli soldiers. In recent years, the kaffiyeh has become a popular fashion item and a symbol of struggles for liberation around the world. While the kaffiyeh is primarily associated with Palestinians, anyone can wear it as a symbol of Palestinian liberation. Despite facing backlash in some Western countries, sales of the kaffiyeh have soared during the Israel-Gaza war. Gaza conflict, Middle East tourism struggles for survival. Deutsche Welle. The recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has led to a decrease in tourism in the Middle East. Tourist destinations such as Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and Petra in Jordan have seen a decline in visitors due to concerns about safety. The conflict has also affected other countries in the region, including Lebanon, Israel, Morocco, Tunisia, and Cyprus. The decrease in tourist numbers is a blow to these countries, as tourism is an important source of income and contributes significantly to their economies. The impact of the conflict on the tourism industry is expected to continue for the foreseeable future, and if the conflict persists, it could have long-term effects on the sector. The decreased income from tourism is likely to result in reduced salaries for employees in the industry and could lead to the closure of small businesses that rely on tourism. Additionally, the decline in tourist numbers during the Christmas period is a cause for concern, as this is typically a busy time for the industry. Israel considers how to remove threat of Hamas fighters in Gaza. Wall Street Journal. Israel and the US are discussing the idea of expelling thousands of Hamas fighters from Gaza in order to shorten the war. This is part of evolving Israeli and American talks about who will run Gaza when the war ends and what can be done to ensure that the territory can never be used to stage another attack on Israel. One proposal for how to govern a post-Hamas Gaza is the creation of what Israel calls Hamas-free safe zones ruled by a new Gaza authority backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Wartime unity between the US and Israel will soon face its toughest test. CNN. The lull in fighting between Israel and Hamas raises moral, political, and military dilemmas for both sides. Israel aims to completely crush Hamas, but the US is urging more restraint to protect Palestinian civilians. The Israeli government is being pulled in two directions: the desire to get all of the hostages back and to press on with its military operation after a pause that allowed Hamas to regroup. The U.S. priorities are to extend the truce, release all hostages, alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, support Israel's efforts to prevent future terror attacks, and focus on post-war governance and diplomatic solutions. However, these goals may not always align with those of the Israeli government. The conflict has cost President Biden politically, as foreign policy goals have been compromised and the Democratic Party has been divided. Republican attacks could increase tensions between the U.S. and Israel if differences arise over the future conduct of the war. The extent to which Israel will test Biden's loyalty, forbearance, and political viability remains to be seen. Blinken returns to Israel as negotiators race to prolong Gaza ceasefire. Wall Street Journal. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on Israeli leaders to extend the ceasefire with Hamas militants in Gaza. The ceasefire was extended by 1 day following the release of 16 hostages by militants. Further negotiations are ongoing to extend the ceasefire further. However, Egyptian officials have said they face an uphill battle. China releases first position paper on the Israel-Gaza war. What does it say? South China Morning Post. China has issued its first position paper on the Israeli-Gaza war, calling for a comprehensive ceasefire and a UN conference to draw up a roadmap for a two-state solution. The paper also called for an immediate and sustained humanitarian truce. China's President, Xi Jinping, also sent a message to the UN promising that China would continue to provide humanitarian and development assistance to the Palestinian people. The position paper called for the UN Security Council to demand a comprehensive ceasefire and end to the fighting, as well as to restore the two-state solution and facilitate a comprehensive, just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. The Palestinian teenagers suddenly freed from jail in Hamas hostage deal. Financial Times. Israel has released 30 Palestinian women and children for every 10 hostages Hamas has released from captivity in Gaza. Israel calls each of those released a terrorist, convicted in a military court of crimes ranging from attempted murder to damage to security area. The most common offense for which the Israeli military jails Palestinian children is stone throwing. This is a rite of passage for many teenagers confronted with the constant presence of Israeli soldiers in their villages in the occupied West Bank. Human rights groups document a well-worn path of beatings, harassment, separation from families and eventually months in Israeli prisons. Israel was holding about 146 Palestinian minors for security offenses in its prisons as of September 2019. While minors are held separately from adults, human rights groups and those released during the truce said that conditions in jail sharply deteriorated after October 2019. More teenagers were crowded into each cell, less food was given and family visits were cut off, they said. UN peacekeepers try to stay safe amid Lebanon-Israel border flare-ups. Reuters. The UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, is struggling to keep its own forces safe whilst trying to fulfill its mandate to keep the peace between Israel and Lebanon. Since the outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza 7 weeks ago, UNIFIL soldiers have repeatedly sheltered from intense shelling and rocket launches. The conflict in Gaza has seen Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah, an ally of Hamas, trading fire daily along the Lebanese-Israeli border. No peacekeepers have been killed since the escalation of violence, but 2 have been injured and UNIFIL compounds and bases have been hit and damaged by mortar shells several times. I'm in better spirits, Thai hostages relieved after release by Hamas from Gaza. South China Morning Post. 17 Thai hostages who had been held captive by Hamas in the Gaza Strip were released and arrived back in Bangkok on Thursday. The hostages were part of a group of at least 32 Thais who were kidnapped by Palestinian militants when they attacked Israel on October 7, killing 1,200 people, mostly civilians. Officials have said that Thai Muslim groups worked to negotiate their release, and that Thailand's foreign ministry had also been involved. UAE pledges to allow assembly and expression to be tested by COP28. Financial Times. The United Arab Emirates has pledged to allow peaceful assembly and expression of views at the forthcoming United Nations Climate Summit. However, human rights groups remain concerned about the country's restrictive laws, which limit free speech and ban protests. The groups fear that activists may be detained for raising sensitive issues such as the UAE's role as a major fossil fuel exporter or its history of repression. Activists are planning to attend the summit to highlight issues such as climate justice and domestic human rights abuses in the UAE. Hello, viewers. It's your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees World, Dr. 6. Today, I bring you a diverse range of news from the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict, its impact on the tourism industry in the Middle East, and the efforts of various countries to find a resolution. Let's dive in. First up, we have the kaffiyeh, the traditional Arab headdress that has become a symbol of solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Originally worn for practical purposes, it has now become a fashion item and a global symbol of struggles for liberation. Sales of the kaffiyeh have soared during the Israel-Gaza war, despite facing backlash in some Western countries. It's a powerful example of how fashion can become a political statement. Next, we have the impact of the conflict on the tourism industry in the Middle East. Tourist destinations like Sharm el-Sheikh and Petra have seen a decline in visitors due to safety concerns. This is a blow to countries that rely heavily on tourism for their economies. The decrease in income from tourism could lead to reduced salaries and the closure of small businesses. Additionally, the decline in tourist numbers during the Christmas period is cause for concern. Moving on, Israel and the US are discussing the idea of expelling thousands of Hamas fighters from Gaza to shorten the war. This is part of their talks about the future governance of Gaza and preventing future attacks on Israel. One proposal is the creation of Hamas-free safe zones ruled by a new authority backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. It's an interesting approach that could potentially change the dynamics in the region. The lull in fighting between Israel and Hamas raises moral, political, and military dilemmas for both sides. Israel aims to crush Hamas completely, while the US urges more restraint to protect Palestinian civilians. The conflict has cost President Biden politically, compromising foreign policy goals and dividing the Democratic Party. Tensions between the US and Israel could rise if differences arise over the future conduct of the war. It will be interesting to see how Biden's loyalty and political viability are tested. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on Israeli leaders to extend the ceasefire with Hamas militants in Gaza. Negotiations are ongoing, and the Egyptian officials have said they face an uphill battle. The international community is making efforts to bring about a comprehensive ceasefire and a two-state solution, with China issuing its first position paper on the Israeli-Gaza war. China calls for a UN conference to draw up a roadmap for peace and promises continued support to the Palestinian people. Lastly, we have the release of hostages and the role of UN peacekeepers. Israel has released Palestinian women and children in exchange for hostages held by Hamas. The conditions in Israeli prisons for Palestinian minors have sharply deteriorated, according to human rights groups. UN peacekeepers in Lebanon are facing challenges in keeping themselves safe while trying to fulfill their peacekeeping mandate. They have repeatedly sheltered from intense shelling and rocket launches. That's all the news for today. It's a complex situation with various perspectives and challenges. What are your thoughts on the Israel-Gaza conflict and its impact on the region? Do you have any questions for me? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.